I'm Stephanie Williams, owner of Festive Creations by Stephanie, where I teach people how to make beautiful things. I provide and sell the supplies to make those beautiful things, and I teach you how to grow your online business. Okay. So I am going to put together this wreath kit. It has all three of these ribbons. This I'll show you in a minute. This cute sign in lavender with the daisies on it. Of course, you get the wreath frame, the 21-inch mesh, and you get 2 lavender bushes with this. All right, so I'm going to start out with our 21-inch roll of mesh, and we're going to start by adding that to our wreath frame. The very first thing that we're going to do is open up the twist ties on our wreath frame. Now, with the 21-inch mesh, I literally just throw the roll of mesh on the floor. So you won't see the roll necessarily as we're working on this project because it is on the floor. I'm going to take the first edge and I'm going to fold it over about 8 inches. And that will allow me to put the raw edge of our cut mesh on the inner side, so the side that's not going to be showing. Of course, all mesh frays, so the less exposure we have to movement, the better. So I folded that over and I gathered it at a point where I could add it to my twist tie. Now I'm going to measure out my next poof. In order to do that, I skip the next pencil tie and I measure over to the second one over, which is approximately 10 inches. So I take that mark and gather it there and push it back into the next wreath tie. It is an easy way to measure rather than having to get out a tape measure, and it makes more uniform poofs just by using the twist ties that are already on the wreath frame. Let me do that again. I measure over, I skip one and measure over to the next one, gather it. I put the edges of the mesh on the underside, and then I'm going to put it into the next wreath tie. So we're going to repeat that all the way around the top of our wreath frame. Now that we have the poofs all the way around the top, I'm simply going to take a small section, squeeze it tight, and push it down into a twist tie on the bottom row. I'm going to give that a twist, just a single twist right there where I pulled it down to the second row or the outer rim of our wreath frame, and give it a twist. Then we're going to repeat the same process that we did on the top. We're going to measure over 2 tencel ties, gather it, and then put our poof into the wreath tie that is closest to that poof. One thing when you're adding to any wreath frame is that you want to make sure that the mesh is as close to the frame as possible. Push it down close to the frame and get your twist tie as snug as possible between your mesh and your frame. We're going to go ahead and repeat that process all the way around the bottom. And it's up to you whether you want to like poof it out, give it a little body as you go along, or you can go back afterwards and give it a little love. Sometimes I'll stick my hand up inside of the poof to kind of make it a little more poofier. But with this particular design, our poofs are not necessarily the main attraction. We're just adding the base to our wreath frame. Then if we have, in this case, we added a third row where I went in between the first and the second row and added just a string of mesh to end it off.
I put a good twist on that final, and I'm just going to cut off that mesh. I promise it's not going to show on your finished design. So now we have a nice full wreath base with a top row and a bottom row, and then we added a third inner row of not necessarily poofs, but it fills in that third row. Now we're going to add the sign. And in order to do that, this particular sign had holes already drilled at the top and the bottom. So I'm using a pipe cleaner or chenille stem, however you refer it to. And I'm just going to give it a couple of twists at one at the top. We're going to attach one at the top, and we're going to also do that at the bottom. I do have a separate video on how to attach signs to wreaths, so you can always check out that other video on how to attach different signs to your wreath. With this particular wreath, because of the 21-inch mesh, it's a little bit fuller. And there's a couple of different styles that you can do when you're adding this sign. So this sign is actually a 12-inch round sign. It's a 15-inch frame. You'll notice that if we put the sign from the top, so if we attach from the top, we have a good visual field of the sign. But if you put the sign underneath and attach it from the bottom, see how very little of that sign shows through? So for this sign, I'm going to attach it from the top, and I'm going to figure out my placement, where I want it, and where I want those two pipe cleaners to attach to the frame. So once I figure out my placement, I'm simply going to take my pipe cleaner and feed it through the mesh and attach it to the wire frame underneath. A common mistake that a lot of people that are just starting out making wreaths is they want to separate the mesh and move it off to the side when they go to add the sign to the frame. And what that will do is actually cause separation in your mesh that will be a permanent separation. So take your pipe cleaner and push it down through the weave of the frame or of the mesh. Once you have it pushed through and you are on each side of the frame, on the back side, which I know you can't see right now, I'll show you that in just a moment, then we'll be able to tie that off. So let's turn this over, and you'll see that I've put my pipe cleaners around the side of each side of the wire frame, and I'm going to give it a good twist. Before I do my final tightening of my twist, I look at my placement, make sure that my sign doesn't jiggle around, move around. Let's make a bow. So for this, I use my Easy Bow Maker, which you can find in my store at festivecreationsbystephanie.com. And for this one, I'm just going to use a 6-inch tail for our bow. So I am measured out 6 inches from those pegs to the edge of my ribbon. And my loop on my bow is measured out to the 6-inch mark. I'm going to repeat this process for my bow, and I've moved my tail outward. And so now I have tails opposite of each other and my loops opposite each other. We're going to repeat that process for all 3 of the ribbons that come with this particular kit, or if you are working with any bow whatsoever, if you're using more than one ribbon, this is just one of the many ribbon or bow techniques that can be used, and it really becomes a matter of personal preference. As I add my second ribbon to my bow, I'm making it a little bit shorter than the loops below it. So the first loop in the purple ribbon is 6 inches, so this one would be about 5 inches in length for both my ribbon tails and my loops on my bow. I'm making my loops opposite each other and my tails opposite of each other. one more ribbon here. We're going to use the yellow and repeat this process just a little bit shorter. So the loops on the yellow ribbon would be about 4 inches in length, and the tails are going to be about 4 inches in length. You just want to make sure for this particular bow recipe that each loop is a little bit shorter than the one before so that you can see the ribbon behind it. I do guys like to use floral wire a lot in my bows, and I like to use 22 gauge floral wire to tie off my bows. So using the 22 gauge, I cut in a piece of wire about 20 inches in length. I'm going to lay that on top of all 3 of my ribbons and carefully pull that off of the spindles or the dowel rods of my Easy Bow Maker. On the back side, I'm going to take and give that a really tight twist so that my ribbon doesn't shift as we go to fluff the bow. So I just give that a few good twists, and I'm keeping it really taut, actually tight as I'm twisting. If I need to polish up any dovetails on ribbon that I haven't dovetailed yet, I'll do that at this particular point as well. So I'm just fluffing out our ribbon or our bow, and now it's time to add it to our wreath. With this particular sign, I wanted to make sure that my bow did not interfere with the message on the sign, which of course is welcome. That there's a lot of different things that will come into play on where to place your bow. It might be the overall visual aspect of the wreath. So I kind of have that visual before I place my bow. So once again, I'm going to take that floral wire and I'm going to feed it through the mesh. I'm not going to separate the mesh. I'm going to feed it through the mesh. Once I have my wires fed through the mesh, I'm going to place the wire one on each side of the wire frame that is behind our wreath itself. And just like when we attach the sign, we're going to twist it and secure it to the wire frame. Now it's time to make some ribbon tails. So this particular wreath is going to have 14-inch ribbon tails. So when I do a 21-inch mesh, I typically will use a 14-inch ribbon tail. So we're going to use a 2.5-inch ribbon and a 1.5-inch ribbon, both cut at 14 inches. The wreath itself, the wreath frame has 18 twist ties, so you will need a total of 18 of each color, measured 14 inches in length. I layer those on top of each other, and I pinch it in the center and then place it into my first twist tie. For this, I like to start on the bottom row, adding my ribbon tails. That way I'm not moving. So if I started with the top row, I would have to move them out of the way to get to the bottom of the row. So I recommend that you start by adding your ribbon tails to the bottom first. So again, I'm laying out my 2.5-inch ribbon and placing the 1.5-inch ribbon on top. I'm going to find my center by folding it in half there, pinching that, and then I kind of give it a little bit of a V shape before I place it into each twist tie. We're going to repeat that process all the way around the entire bottom section of our wreath frame. Now that we have the outer frame tails completed, we're going to start working on the top of the frame. So we're going to do the exact same process. Our 14-inch ribbon tails, layer the 2.5-inch with the 1.5-inch on top, and put one in each twist tie. You'll notice that I'm putting my tails away from the center of the wreath. So they're all facing in the same direction. I love adding greenery, florals, fun things to my wreath. So in this particular wreath, we're going to use some lavender sprigs. So I have 2 different lavender sprigs. And we're going to be using both of those for this particular design. I'm just going to cut the wires off close to the stem, the base of the stem, and get those all cut before we get started. I do have my glue pot heated up over there on my right, your left, and we'll be using hot glue for this experience as well. So when you go to add florals, greenery, anything like that, I like to kind of play with the placement. I also enjoy sometimes putting some greenery into the loops on the bow itself. And of course, you'll want to make sure that you have enough of your stem to reach down into the design. One of the best techniques is adding hot glue and then pushing it down into the weave of the mesh itself. And you do want to make sure that that glue touches as many spots as you possibly can. I will also take some of the twist tie and wrap it around my floral or greenery as well as a second reinforcement. So I'll use the twist ties as part of the mechanics to hold in my floral. So let's finish adding some of this beautiful lavender to our wreath. So to finish this up, I'm taking the lavender that I have remaining and I'm integrating that into underneath the loops of the bow. So I'll actually lift up a loop and add hot glue and stick it in between the fabric on the loops of the bow. And it really just brings that more cohesive look. And it looks like Mother Nature's kind of growing and weaving in our design. Don't be afraid to add different elements to your wreath itself. And in this particular design, I had a little bit more extra lavender left over from the bushes. So I really kind of added more towards the bottom of the wreath itself and around the bow. So it appeared a little thicker or heavier at this section of our wreath. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I certainly hope that you were able to pick up a few tips and tricks or learn something new today. And as always, I love to see what you create.